The carriage came up the Stonecross drive at the worst hour of a bad year, and I knew before the wheels stopped what the man inside had come to take. I had read the letter twice. The Duke of Marchmont held my father's marker, £8,000 against a house that could not have fetched 4, and he meant to foreclose before the quarter day. There was no money, there were no friends left who would lend it. My sisters had laughed when the solicitor read the will aloud, Stonecross to Clara, they had said, as though the words were the punchline to a joke our father had spent his last breath arranging. They had gone back to their own warm houses. I had stayed, because someone had to, and because I had nowhere else to be. So when the door knocker fell, I did not send Mrs. Tewkesbury to answer it. I went myself, and I stood in the cold hall beneath the long case clock that had not ticked since the night my father died, and I opened the door to the man come to ruin me. He was taller than the doorway wanted him to be, and he did not remove his hat at once, which told me he expected the visit to be brief. His coat was good, but plainer than a duke's coat ought to be. His eyes, when they found mine, were the brown of wet bark, dark and unhurried, and they did the one thing I had not braced for. They stopped on me. They held. As though he had come expecting a frightened spinster he could move past on his way to the strong room, and had instead met something that did not move. "Miss Denholm," he said. His voice was low and did not rise, and I understood at once that it never did, that he had learned, somewhere, that a man who never raises his voice need never lower it either. "I am Marchmont. You have had my letter." "I have had your letter," I said. "It is wrong by £7,400, and I will not be paying it." I had not planned to say it, I had planned to be civil. But the figure had lived in my chest for a fortnight, and it came out of me whole, and I watched it land on him, watched something flicker behind the wet bark eyes that was not anger and was not pity, but something closer to a man recognizing the sound of his own thought spoken aloud by a stranger. "May I come in?" he said. It was not quite a question. I stepped back to let him pass, and that was the beginning of it. A duke, and a debt, and a clock that would not run, and the thing neither of us yet understood, which was that the £8,000 was not a wall between us, but a rope, and we were tied to opposite ends of it, and the same hand had pulled it tight around us both. I took him into the morning room, because it was the only room with a fire, and even that fire was mean. He did not comment on the cold. He set his hat on the table, and I saw his left hand then, the 2 outer fingers curled and stiff, refusing to lie flat. An old hurt he handled as though it were furniture, something he had stopped noticing years ago. He saw me see it, and did not hide it, and did not explain it. "You dispute the sum," he said. "I dispute the sum. I had the papers ready. I had been ready for a week. My father borrowed £2,000 in the spring of 1812 against the South Fields. By the time he died, he had repaid 1,400 of it. £600, Your Grace. That is the debt of this house. I have the receipts. I have the marker," he said. "And the marker says 8. Then the marker lies." The room went very still. Mrs. Tewkesbury, who had stayed at Stonecross a full year without wages because she had buried my mother and would not leave me to the wolves alone, stood in the doorway with her hands folded and her chin up, and I loved her for it. The Duke looked at me for a long moment. "Do you know?" he said slowly. "You are the first person in this entire affair to call it a lie to my face. You are the first person to bring it to my door." "No," he said it quietly. "I am not. The marker came to me by assignment 11 months ago, Miss Denholm, from a man of business who managed certain of my late brother's affairs. I did not lend your father a shilling. I inherited a paper that says I am owed £8,000, and I have come to collect it because I am told by the same man of business that I cannot afford not to. It was the crack. I had braced for a hammer and been handed a confession instead, and I did not know what to do with it. You came yourself, I said. Dukes do not come themselves. They send a clerk and a bailiff, and they never see the house. No, he agreed. They do not. Then why are you here? He did not answer that. He turned his stiff left hand over on the table, once, as though checking it still belonged to him, and he said, £600. You can prove 1,400 repaid? To the shilling. Then we have a difficulty, said the Duke of Marchmont, because the man who assigned me your father's marker also keeps my books. And if your £1,400 is real, then a great many of his numbers are not. And if his numbers are not real, he looked at me, and for the first time the level voice had something underneath it. Something that had been held down a long time. Then I am not a wealthy man come to collect a debt. I am a poor one who has been robbed in his own house and made to do the robbing. The fire spat. In the cold hall beyond the door, the stopped clock said nothing at all. His name was Josiah Pell. He had been the late Duke's man of business and was now the present Duke's, the way a tenant becomes part of a property and the new owner inherits him along with the roof and the rot. He held the keys to Marchmont's strong rooms and the running of his rents and the paper of a dozen lesser families besides, including, it now appeared, mine. He had assigned my father's marker to the Duke as an asset of the estate, inflated sevenfold, and he had set the foreclosure hearing for the 11th of the month before the Assize's standing magistrate, 8 days off. 8 days, I said. He moved it forward. The Duke said, I am told the calendar required it. I am told a great many things I am beginning to believe were required only by him. I should have been afraid. A wiser woman would have taken the fear and made something sensible of it, would have written to her sisters, or thrown herself on the Duke's mercy, or wept. Instead, I felt the cold, clear thing I had felt the night my father died, when the house went quiet and there was no one to manage it but me. And I had simply begun to manage it. I had kept the books of a failing estate for a year. I knew what robbery looked like in a column of figures. I had simply never had the man who profited from it sitting at my own table, telling me he had been robbed too. Your Grace, I said, if your man of business has stolen from you, you do not need £8,000 from me. You need to hang him, and you cannot hang him with my receipts alone. Because I am a woman with no standing in any court that matters, and my word against his is no word at all. No, the Duke said, it is not. And then, watching me, but you have thought further than that already. I can see you have. You did not say it cannot be done. You said it cannot be done with the receipts alone. I had not meant to let him see that far into me. But he had, and there was no calling it back. So I told him the truth, or the part of it I had. My father did not trust Pell, I said. He told me so the winter before he died. He said a great many things that winter, when his chest was bad, and he thought I was not listening. He said the books at Stonecross told one story, and that there was a truer book somewhere, and that if it ever came to law I was to remember where a man keeps the things he cannot afford to lose. I stopped. I did not know what he meant. I have looked. I have turned out his study and his bedchamber and the muniment chest. There is nothing. The Duke was quiet for a moment. Where, he said, did your father like to sit? It was not the question I expected, and it undid something in me, because it was the right question and a stranger had asked it. In the hall, I said. under the clock. He wound it himself every Sunday. He would not let the servants touch it. My voice did a thing I did not permit it to do, and I mastered it. It stopped the night he died. I have not been able to bear to wind it. We looked at each other across the mean fire, the Duke and I watched him understand it the half-second before I did. I do not know which of us reached the clock first. We were both of us in the cold hall, and the candle Mrs. Tewkesbury held threw our two shadows up the wall, his long and mine beside it, nearly touching, and I had the door of the clock case open and my hands inside the dark of it before I had decided to move. The pendulum hung dead. Behind it, where no winding key need ever go, my fingers met the edge of something that was not brass and not wood. A flat package, oilskin wrapped, pushed up into the hood of the case, where a man would have to know to look. I drew it out. My hands were not steady. The Duke did not take it from me, I marked that. Even then, that he did not put out his good hand and take it the way every man in my life had taken every important thing. He only stood close enough that I could feel the cold coming off his coat and the warmth coming off him underneath it, and he said, "Open it." Inside the oilskin was a slim ledger bound in marbled board, and a letter folded small and sealed with my father's ring, and across the front of the ledger in my father's hand were the words, "The true account, kept against the day Pell denies it." I will not pretend I read it cleanly. I read it the way a drowning woman reads the shore. But the shape of it stood up off the page within a minute, because numbers are honest even when men are not. And these were the honest numbers: £2,000 borrowed, 1,400 repaid, and against every false advance Pell had later entered, my father had written the date the money supposedly changed hands, and beside 3 of those dates, in a hand growing shakier as the winter wore on, he had written Marchmont's seal. But H.M. abroad. Impossible, your brother, I said. The late Duke. He was abroad? Lisbon, said Marchmont. His voice had gone very flat and very careful, the voice of a man holding a great deal still. He spent the last 18 months of his life in Lisbon. He died there. He never came home. He read the date over my shoulder. I felt him go rigid. That instrument bears his seal and his signature, dated the 9th of October, 1814. My brother was 1,000 miles away and dying. He could not have signed it. No one alive could have made him sign it. He looked up, and the held thing behind his eyes was loose now. Pell forged a dead man's hand to make a debt out of nothing, and then he handed me the proceeds and called it my inheritance. He has been doing it for years, and I, God help me, have been spending the money. We were very close. The candle had burned down, and Mrs. Tewkesbury had gone for another and not come back, with the tact of a woman who had buried more than one secret in this house. I was aware of the Duke's breath and the heat of him, and the 8 inches of cold air between his mouth and mine that suddenly felt like the only honest thing left to defend. Neither of us crossed it. That we did not cross it was the whole of what passed between us, and it was more than a kiss would have been. £600, he said softly. You owe me £600, Miss Denholm, and I owe you an apology that would not fit in this house. I do not want your apology, I said, and stepped back, because if I had not stepped back, I would not have stepped back at all. There was a thing I had not told him, and I told him now, in the morning room, with the true ledger between us on the table like a drawn blade. Pell wrote to me, I said, a week ago, before your letter came. He offered me £500 and passage to wherever I cared to go, on the single condition that I leave Stonecross quietly before the hearing and contest nothing. I watched the Duke's face. He called it mercy. A spinster with no prospects, he said, should not be left to watch her father's house sold over her head. He was very kind about it. I have the letter. And you refused. I had not answered him. I made myself say the rest of it, because he had laid his ruin on my table, and I would not be smaller than that. I will be honest with you, Your Grace, since we have apparently decided to be honest. £500 is more money than I will see again in my life. I have a sister who would take me in and never once let me forget it, and a body that is not getting younger, and no reason on earth to fight a duke and a thief over a broken house that two of my own family laughed at. The sensible thing, the thing a wiser woman would do, is take Pell's money and go. And the unwise thing is this. I put my hand flat on the true ledger. Pell offered me £500 to disappear, because he is afraid of exactly this book, which means this book is worth a great deal more than £500, which means I should not sell it cheap, and which means I stopped, because I had arrived somewhere while talking, and only now saw where it was. Your Grace, stop apologizing for what was done in your brother's name. Tell me what you intend to do. And then let me tell you what I intend. He looked at me for what felt like a long time. I intend, he said at last, to go before the magistrate on the 11th and lay the forgery open. I have the standing to compel a hearing. A duke's word will make a magistrate sit and listen, where a woman's receipts would be sent home with a pat on the head. Forgive me. But you said it yourself. I did say it myself. But my name is on the fraud. Miss Denholm. My brother's seal. My estate. My profit. If I stand up alone and cry forgery, Pell has only to ask the obvious question, and it has already been asked. By his friends, in rooms I am not invited to, which is whether I am exposing a thief or accusing a dead man to cover my own theft. I cannot prove my own innocence with my own mouth. It is the one thing a man can never do. No, I said, but I can prove it with this. I touched the ledger. My father dated the forgeries against the days your brother lay dying abroad. You can prove your brother was in Lisbon. There will be letters, a parish register, a ship's manifest, the men who carried his coffin home. I cannot make a magistrate listen to me. You cannot make him believe you. But your standing and my proof, set down together in the same room on the same morning, I spread my hands. Neither of us can do this. Both of us can. The fire had gone to embers. Somewhere above us a floorboard settled. The Duke of Marchmont sat in my cold morning room with the wreck of his fortune and the saving of it both lying on my mother's table. And he did the thing that decided me. He did not tell me it was too dangerous. He did not offer to do it for me. He did not send me to safety. He said, "Then we had better not lose." No, I said. We had better not. That was the choice, and it could not be unmade. The moment I said it, I had burned Pell's £500 and the quiet life it bought, and I had tied my name to a duke's in a fight we might lose, in which losing meant I was the spinster who helped a thieving lord slander an honest steward, and I would not even have a broken house left to be slandered in. I knew it. I chose it anyway. I had spent a year being the only person at Stonecross who would not run, and I was not going to start running now that I finally had something to stay for. Pell did not wait for the 11th. He must have had eyes in the village, or ears at the inn where the Duke's coachman drank, because the morning of the 9th, 2 days before the hearing, with Marchmont gone to the county town to swear the depositions about his brother and gather the Lisbon papers, Pell's men came up the Stonecross drive. Not a bailiff with a writ. 4 men with a cart and crowbars and an order, signed by a magistrate Pell owned, to take an inventory of the contents of the house against the debt. I knew what they had come for. They went through the rooms with their list, breaking what would not open, and Mrs. Tewkesbury stood between them and the muniment chest with a poker until one of them took it from her hand, and I stood in the cold hall with the true ledger sewn into my petticoat against my own skin, where no man would dare to search a lady, and I watched the largest of them take a crowbar to the long case clock. I had wound it the night before. For the first time in a year, I had wound my father's clock, and it had ticked, and I had wept in the dark hall like a child, because the house had a heartbeat again. The crowbar went into the case, and the works gave with a sound like a struck bell strangled in the middle, and the ticking stopped, and the man pulled the door off its hinges and reached into the dark of the hood where the oilskin packet had lain, and found nothing, because the only thing of worth that clock had ever hidden was sewn into my skirts and breathing against my hip. "It is not here," I told him. "I do not know where I found the voice. Whatever Pell told you to bring back, it is not here. He has sent you to wreck a clock." They left with a cartload of furniture and a clock in pieces, and a letter the eldest man pressed into my hand at the door, which I did not open until they had gone. It was not for me. It was a copy, sent to me out of pure malice, so that I should know my ally was sinking, a chancery citation, served that same morning on the Duke of Marchmont in the county town, naming him principal in a fraud upon the estate of the late Duke, his own brother, and requiring him to answer in London within the month. Pell had read the wind. He had seen the Duke turn against him, and he had moved first, and he had done the cruel and clever thing. He had made Gabriel the accused before Gabriel could be the accuser, and he had set the trap in London, 140 miles away, on the far side of the hearing, where I would have to stand alone. I sat down on the bottom stair beside the ruined clock, with the true ledger against my skin, and Pell's 2 blows around me, the wreck and the citation, and I understood that the 11th would come whether the Duke could be there or not, and that I might have to walk into that room without him. I wrote to him that night. I told him what they had taken and what they had not found, and what the citation said, and I told him not to come, that if he answered the citation in London he kept his neck out of the noose, and might yet save himself, and that I would carry the ledger to the magistrate on the 11th and say my piece, and if a woman's word was no word at all then, at least it would be on the record, and someone might believe it later when it could no longer help either of us. I told him to save himself. I meant it. I had been left alone before. I knew how to do it. I did not sleep. At dawn I dressed in my mother's good grey wool, and I sewed the ledger back against my side, and I had Mrs. Tewkesbury's nephew bring the gig round, and I drove myself the 7 miles to the county town to ruin myself in public, which is the one freedom no one had thought to take from me. The magistrate's room over the assize hall was full. Pell had filled it. That was his mistake. Though he did not know it yet, he had wanted an audience for my humiliation, and a crowd to carry the story that the Marchmont woman had run and the Denholm chit had crumbled. He stood at the front in a good black coat, soft-faced, sorrowful, a man performing reluctance at having to crush a spinster, and the magistrate sat above him, looking at his watch, and there was no Duke. "Miss Denholm," the magistrate said, "when my name was called and I came forward, you contest the debt of £8,000 upon the Stonecross estate?" "I do, sir." "On what grounds? And on whose authority?" "On the grounds that it is forged," I said. "And on my own authority, sir, since I am the owner of the estate, and there is no one else." A ripple went through the room, half of it laughter. Pell let his sorrow deepen. The magistrate sighed, and opened his mouth to send me home with a pat on the head, exactly as the Duke had said he would, and I drew the true ledger out from my side, and laid it on the table, and began to speak, fast, because I knew I had only the seconds before someone stopped a woman from speaking, about dates, about the 9th of October 1814, about a seal pressed in England by a hand that was in Lisbon, and Pell's soft face began to come apart at the edges, and the magistrate stopped reaching for his gavel. and the door at the back of the room opened. "She speaks with mine," said the Duke of Marchmont. He had ridden through the night. I learned that later. He had read my letter telling him to save himself, and he had got on a horse instead, and ridden 140 miles the wrong way, toward the noose and not away from it. And he came up the center of that crowded room, mud to the thigh, with a leather case under his stiff left arm, and he set it on the table beside my ledger. And he did not look at the magistrate. He looked at me. "You told me to save myself," he said, low. For me, though the silent room heard every word, I did. I considered it a breath. I found I would rather be ruined honestly beside you than saved alone by him. Then he turned to the room, and the level voice that never rose did not rise now, which was why it carried to every corner. "I am Marchmont, and I am named in a chancery citation as the author of this fraud. I have come to answer it here, today, before I answer it in London, because the proof of my innocence and the proof of this woman's claim are the same proof, and I will not let it be heard in 2 rooms a month apart, where a clever man might explain half of it away. Sir, to the magistrate, in this case are the parish record of my brother's death in Lisbon, the manifests of the ship that carried him out and the one that carried his coffin home, and the sworn depositions of the men who nursed him in his last months. He was abroad and dying from the spring of 1813 until his death in the autumn of 1814. He never set foot in England again. Now I ask you to read aloud the date upon the instrument by which Mr. Pell claims £8,000 of an estate my brother never touched. The magistrate read it. The 9th of October 1814, Marchmont's seal. The late Duke's signature. "My brother," said Gabriel, very quietly, into a room where no one breathed, "was 4 weeks dead when he signed it. It is a strange thing to watch a man drown standing up in a dry room." Pell tried. He was clever to the last. He reached for the explanation, the deputy who held the seal, the clerical error, the grieving lady's confusion. But the dates do not bend, and the dead Duke would not be moved from Lisbon to oblige him. And the true ledger lay open under the magistrate's hand in my dead father's writing. £1,400 repaid, and 3 forgeries dated against a corpse. The room turned. I felt it turn, the way you feel weather change. They had come to watch a spinster crushed and a thief vindicated, and they got the thief instead, and there is nothing a crowd loves so much as the moment the man performing sorrow is made to feel it in earnest. "Miss Pell," said the magistrate, in the voice of a man who has just understood how badly he was nearly used, "you will not be leaving by the door you came in." I do not remember the order of what happened after. I remember Pell's hands when they took him, soft hands that had forged a dead man's name, going white at the knuckle. I remember the magistrate striking out the £8,000 and entering the true debt of 600 against the estate, payable to the Duke, who said into the record that he forgave it entire, and asked the clerk to write that down twice. And I remember turning from the table to find Gabriel already turned toward me, mud to the thigh and grey with sleeplessness, looking at me as though the crowded room had emptied of everyone but us. "You came back the wrong way," I said. My voice was not steady. I had stopped requiring it to be. "I came back toward the thing worth keeping," he said. "I have spent 11 years keeping my voice down so that no one would ever know what I wanted. I am tired of it." His good hand found mine. The stiff one came up and curved against my jaw, the curled fingers and all, and I did not flinch from it, and I felt him register that I did not. "Marry me, Clara, not to save your house. Your house is saved, and your name is your own. And you owe me nothing, and that is precisely why I am asking. Marry me because we are better proof together than apart, and I have no intention of being apart from you again." I was aware of the magistrate. and Pell's empty chair, and 100 witnesses to my answer. A wiser woman might have asked for time. I had stopped being wise the morning I refused £500, and I had not regretted it once. "I will," I said, and the room, which had come for a hanging and got a betrothal instead, made the sound a room makes when it forgives itself by cheering for someone else. He kissed me there, before all of them, the Duke of Marchmont who never raised his voice, and the kiss was not loud either, and it did not need to be. By the following spring the clock in the Stonecross hall was running again. He had it mended himself, found a man in the county town who knew old works, and stood over him, and would not let me pay for it, and when it ticked again on a Sunday morning with the sun coming through the hall windows and the smell of bread from a kitchen that had a cook in it once more, I stood under it with my husband's stiff hand in mine and listened to the house keep time, and did not weep, though it was a near thing. Josiah Pell was tried at the Lent Assizes and transported for the term of his natural life. The last anyone heard, he was keeping the books of a penal colony's stores, which I am told is the nearest thing to mercy a man like Pell could hope for, since it left him his numbers. My sisters wrote, both of them within a week of the wedding being in the papers. Diana with congratulations and a list of grievances, Augusta with congratulations and a request, and I answered them kindly and at length, and invited them for the summer, because I had learned at Stonecross that a person who will not run is also a person who need not slam doors. We did not live grandly. The Marchmont fortune was smaller than the world believed. Once Pell's false numbers were struck out of it, and Gabriel said he found he liked it better honest and lean than fat and stolen, and I found I believed him. We lived between his house and mine, and we kept the south fields my father had borrowed against, and on a morning in the second spring, I had a daughter on my hip by then, dark-eyed as her father, with my mother's name. Gabriel came to find me in the hall under the running clock. "It is striking the hour wrong by 4 minutes," he said, frowning at it, the way he frowned at everything he loved and would not say he loved. "Leave it," I said. "My father always set it 4 minutes fast. He said it gave a man a head start on the day." So we left it, and every hour of every year after, the clock at Stonecross struck 4 minutes early, ahead of all the other clocks in the county, the way a house keeps time when the people in it have decided, against all sense, to stay and to stay together.